All right, so you know how every single time that there is a mass shooting at some school, like the one that we just saw in Uvalde, Texas, where almost like 24 innocent school children as well as their teachers were massacred, that you always hear Republicans coming out and saying that this is not an issue about guns, this is simply an issue about mental health. And to some extent, I think that that is partially true. We do have a disastrous mental health situation right now in the United States, but I also think that it is largely to do with the ease of access and the proliferation of guns around this country. Now, we just got a perfect opportunity for Republicans to demonstrate that they actually do consider this to be a mental health issue, and surprise, surprise, they voted exactly how we would have thought that they would. So, here from ACYN, he says 205 Republicans vote against school-based mental health services. So I got a great breakdown here from Truth Out where they give us a little bit of perspective in terms of some of the rhetoric that we have heard from Republicans, some responses that they gave in terms of why they were opposing this bill, and then I'll give you guys a little bit of my thoughts on this. So they start off here saying that on Thursday, the House passed a bill aimed at expanding access to mental health services in schools that garnered only one Republican vote, despite the party's ceaseless scapegoating of mental illness for issues in the United States. They say the Mental Health Matters Act passed 220 to 205 on a largely party line vote, with all 205 no votes coming, of course, from Republicans. And Representative Brian Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania apparently cast the sole Republican yes vote. They say the bill, which was introduced by Representative Mark DeSaulnier from California and supported by the White House, would provide grants for schools to hire more mental health experts and grow their mental health services, especially schools in areas with high need. It would also provide mental health protections to adults with private health insurance and children and staff in Head Start programs, which are aimed at serving low-income children from birth to age 5. And I think that this portion of it, in terms of expanding mental health protections to adults with private health insurance, is probably one of the main reasons that you had so many conservatives who are entirely beholden to the health insurance, big pharmaceutical corporations as well, that they are beholden to a lot of these corporations who funnel money into their campaigns. And so, of course, they would not want to support any piece of legislation that even begins to challenge the power and the influence and the economic dominance that they have in this country. So they got a quote here saying that educators have been forced to play an outsized role in supporting and responding to students' mental health needs, leading to increased depression and trauma among educators, their students, and the families and the community. DeSaulnier said on the need for this bill, he says, however, our schools do not have the specialized staff necessary to respond to the increased prevalence and complexity of students' mental health needs. Now we get a little bit of pushback here from one of the Republicans who opposed this bill. Virginia Fox from North Carolina said that she took issue with a portion of the bill that punishes employers when employees are denied mental health and substance abuse benefits, and said that the country would be better off without the bill. So I would like a little bit of follow-up on that and a little bit of specifics in terms of how that would be bad for the country, or how, the country would be better off without having protections for workers on mental health and substance abuse benefits, right? I mean, this is the same party here that constantly goes out and screeches about, the opioid deaths in this country, the fentanyl deaths in this country. But then when it comes to actually voting on any piece of legislation which could even fractionally help address that issue, then they don't want anything to do with it, right? And the reason they don't want anything to do with it in this case is because it would actually require a lot of employers, the capitalist ownership class, in order to provide some of the bare necessities that every other developed country around the world already guarantees to the entirety of their citizens. So, I mean, this is even like kind of a half measure from my perspective, because obviously I'm in support of something like Medicare for all, guaranteeing healthcare across the board, including mental health care and addiction services to every single American, regardless, free at the point of service. But this is like a half measure to just say that employers can't actively discriminate against their employees and deny them these mental health or addiction services benefits. I mean, this is like the most ghoulish shit you could possibly imagine. It is transparently corrupt here. I mean, this is them serving the interests of the capitalist class, the employer class, in order to, avoid supporting a bill that could actually materially help people who are going through some of these things that do, at least in part, sometimes lead to these mass shooting situations. Now, again, there's a balance there between how much of this is the fault of the proliferation of guns around this country, how much of this is actually just a mental health issue. But regardless, Republicans in this country want to actively make both of those issues worse. Okay, they want to loosen even some of the mild gun reforms, the common sense gun reforms that are overwhelmingly supported by vast majority of the American people. They want to get rid of those, and they also want to cut things like Medicare and Medicaid, and cut the ability for people to actually get access to those mental health services. So whichever frame you want to take on this, whether you think it's more of a gun issue, whether you think it's more of a mental health issue, Republicans Republicans oppose the solutions to either of those. Okay, so there is no legitimate way to make an argument here that they are serious about addressing this issue in any way, shape, or form. But to give a little bit more details here, saying that experts have said that children's mental health is in crisis, and the COVID-19 pandemic has obviously taken a toll on children's mental health, whether through trauma, loss, or otherwise, leading to a corresponding rise in mental health crises among children, research finds. They say that pediatric mental health professionals say that the legislation aimed at permanently increasing resources for children's mental health is sorely needed. So obviously, right, I mean, not only just on mental health, but just across the board, our public schools in this country are drastically underfunded and need a lot more resources in order to be able to just take care of children within the class, to be able to provide them with, stable food, a good learning environment. We still have teachers that are paying probably thousands of dollars, at least hundreds of dollars out of pocket every single year for their school supply needs. So it's just a completely fucking ridiculous situation. And I think that they make an interesting point here in terms of how COVID has affected young people in this country, right? So typically conservatives will focus solely on the idea that like these lockdowns or virtual learning had a disastrous effect on mental health in this country. And then, they completely ignore all of these other factors. I do think to some extent you can make an argument that like not being in person, not being able to physically interact with your friends could have a negative effect on children's mental health. But I think it's completely wild to just gloss over all of these other factors that they were just listing here in terms of like how many children have lost a teacher, have lost a parental figure in their life, have lost one of their loved ones, have lost, a friend in some circumstances. I think we're talking about, potentially millions and millions of kids across the country, or at least hundreds of thousands of kids who have lost a parent or a loved one or a teacher throughout the COVID pandemic. That is also going to have a disastrous effect on their mental health as well. So I think that it's like an interesting conversation there in terms of like what have been the main driving factors in, escalating this mental health crisis among young people in this country. But they continue with a little bit more context in terms of how Republicans have been weaponizing this issue for years now. They say, others pointed out that Republicans have spent months, if not years, scapegoating mental health issues as a catch-all for problems like mass shootings, which in reality are often spurred by far-right radicalization and white supremacist ideology. They say, indeed, Republicans often dig up supposed concerns about mental health in order to distract from other issues. They say after the elementary school massacre in Uvalde, Texas, Republicans and the far-right scrambled to spread disinformation online about the shooter, pinning the problem on groups that they wish to demonize, including trans people. Remember, we even had Republican members of Congress who immediately after the Uvalde shooting occurred were going out and saying that it was a trans person who did the shooting. Just completely fucking made it up and started spreading that online. But they said that the problem on the groups that they wish to demonize, including trans people, those with mental illness, and the Democratic Party. So I think there's a couple interesting points there. I think that up here, where they say that Republicans are using mental health as a distraction from other issues which do play at least some role in a lot of these mass shootings, like far-right radicalization and white supremacist ideology. Those definitely do play a role. I mean, we saw this with the Buffalo shooting, where this guy drove miles and miles and miles to go target a specifically disproportionately black grocery store at that Tops grocery store in Buffalo. And we've seen this with plenty of other examples of mass shooters who have ties to far-right organizations, who have been radicalized online, who have otherwise succumbed to a lot of these narratives about the Great Replacement theory and shit that basically Tucker Carlson talks about on a regular basis. But I don't think that that's the entire picture. I do think that obviously those are a problem as well. But at some point you got to also look back and just say, if somebody is willing to pick up a gun and they are willing to go to especially an elementary school, but any location, and just commit a massacre and just kill a massive amount of innocent men, women, and children, then they probably also have some mental health issues, right? So it's like a multi-pronged approach that needs to happen. You need to address the gun lobby. You need to enact common sense gun reforms. I mean, even with that bipartisan piece of gun legislation that was passed under Joe Biden recently, that didn't even have the most popular gun reform legislation within it. It didn't even have universal background checks, for example. So that was pathetic. It was watered down. It's not really going to make a serious dent in the ongoing problem with mass shootings. But it's not just the gun lobby. You also do have to address mental health issues in this country. And part of that is decommodifying our healthcare system. Part of that is, guaranteeing healthcare, including mental health care, including addiction services, as a fundamental human right in this country. And that is something that Republicans, along with many Democrats as well, are just fundamentally opposed to. I mean, we still have a president right now like Joe Biden who straight up said that he would veto Medicare for all if it came to his desk. And so, we're not actually addressing any of these issues in a meaningful way, whether it's on the gun issue, whether it's on mental health or healthcare in general, whether it's on the lack of public funding for our public schools in this country and the lack of support for teachers and mental health services within schools. I mean, there's like so many different things that we could be doing right now in order to try to make a dent in this ongoing problem of mass shootings that just seem to be happening on like a weekly basis in this country, which honestly is not an exaggeration. I think so far in this year, we have basically averaged at least one mass shooting per week, if not more than that. I might be underselling that. I'd have to go double check on the data there. But I mean, nobody really across the board is addressing this in a serious way. Obviously, it's a great thing that Democrats managed to barely pass through this school-based mental health services bill. It's going to be going to the Senate. I would be surprised if it gets any bipartisan support. Obviously, it didn't get any in the House. So I would be surprised if Senate Republicans somehow like wake up and decide to support this in the Senate. But, I mean, maybe this gets passed on a party line vote. I think you would need the filibuster for this to actually get passed through the Senate. Not sure what Democrats' approach to that is actually going to be like strategically or on that front. So we'll have to see where this goes in the Senate. I honestly would not be surprised if this gets completely struck down or if it gets hollowed out into oblivion. But honestly, my takeaway from this is that, number one, Republicans are absolutely not serious about addressing any of those issues, whether it's school funding, whether it's mental health, whether it's the gun issue. They are actively trying to make all of those things worse and worsen the likelihood that we are just going to continue having a lot of these mass shootings. And Democrats as well, I mean, just across the board, it just doesn't seem like there's any legitimate movement on this issue in order to prevent these in the future or to, remedy some of the lacks in funding or, the gaps in how we are actually approaching this as a society.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying